Creole culture in Louisiana, while complex, is not that complicated, but it's bigger than just a black or white scenario. When our first ancestors, the French, Europeans, Canadians, and later African ancestors, stepped into the lower Louisiana Purchase territory, they were entering a totally different world. The New World. That New World would impact these people together. Together, in the New World, would evolve a new people, a new culture, and a new identity. Louisiana's Creole peoplehood and identity reflects its own unique Creole-metis heritage and character. Over 300 years in Louisiana Purchase territory, the Muskogean family of Indians, or indigenous peoples, the largest of which were the Choctaw, along with Euro-Canadian, Afro-Asian, Latin, Carib Amerindians, united in cross-cultural and interracial marriages, encouraged under Louis XIV, as seen as in his earliest Code Noir of 1685. The result of this cross-cultural pollination and survival resulted in the adaptation, modification, transformation of ancestral foodways, social, musical, religious, architectural, spiritual, and culinary traditions. Creolization is also nativization. These adaptations and cross-cultural pollinations ultimately produced Louisiana's own unique 300-year-old Creole-metis francophone tradition, a New World people, culture, and identity, a Latinate culture. These traditions are preserved and perpetuated in Louisiana's unique forms of French, the political language of our colonial period, her foodways, her architecture and music. Oftentimes, what is misnomered Spanish influence actually refers to the Latin American and Mexican, Caribbean culinary influences associated with the Spanish-speaking peoples and Spanish colonial period, to be sure, which included the Malagueños, Isleños, and Mexican peoples. Still, the Spanish did rule Louisiana for 40 years, and they, too, would become part of the multi-ethnic we know as Creole in Louisiana. In fact, it was they who first designated the first residents of New Orleans as Creole upon their arrival in 1765. In Louisiana, this Creole-metis cultural foundation first comprises the indigenous Muskogean family of Amerindians, Euro, and Canadian French. The presence of these indigenous peoples remain across the state of Louisiana and into Texas and all the way to California, from Alabama and Mississippi to Pensacola. These include the Eshok, Etakapa, Cashado, Creek, Chickasaw, Houma, Choctaw, Avoyelles, Tunica, Biloxi, Chetimaca, and Tensaw in what is Louisiana today. Long ago noted by both Bienville and Iberville, and by the last great Native American scholar, which was, of course, Sibley. What's interesting, though, is that these Latin Caribbean peoples, along with the Saint-Domingue Creoles, both white, black, red, and yellow, and 19th century French, would create the fabric of Louisiana's Creole-metis culture and foodways, but profoundly enriching and diversifying that culture. In the colonial period, the early French and Spanish Louisiana period, interracial unions continued, legally or not. As revealed in Boubacar Barry's classic work, this intercultural, interracial, international mariage de pays, common law marriages, was a characteristic of the French colonial world. Creolization continued from St. Louis in West Africa to Canada, Saint-Domingue and the French Antilles to the Gulf Coast of Pensacola, Alabama, Mississippi, and the Gulf of Mexico to New Orleans, and upriver to the Franco and Creole parishes of Louisiana, the rural country now, since 1968, relabeled Cajun, as if the Acadians were unique to the area and had created a culture that antedated them by about 100 years. The Acadians, too, however, were the result of métissage in Canada. In fact, they also considered themselves Creole before their tragic diaspora. The comparatively small number of 3,000 to 5,000 Acadians were immersed and assimilated into this 18th century Louisiana Creole-metis culture and never looked back. They would reinforce Louisiana's French colonial and language tradition, Catholic traditions, and the culture. But there is no evidence of the survival of any of the Acadian culinary and social traditions, which are called Cajun, which are in fact Creole and were already here. We don't celebrate, for example, St. John's Day, which is an Acadian and Canadian tradition unknown in Louisiana. We don't eat poutine râpé or soupe à la Toussaint or fricot. These are unknown Acadian and Canadian foods, even as the Canadians and Acadians in Canada don't have gumbo and étouffée, or red beans and rice, foods associated with the Creole colonial and Caribbean world of the maritime. But they would reinforce the